Hi, my name is Anna, I am 29 years old, and if anyone had ever told me that I would use this phrase in the past tense when talking about my husband, I would probably have just laughed, thinking that they did not understand what they were talking about, because our life with Nestor was so complete, so full, so stable that it seemed unshakable to me, like the morning sun over the rooftops or the smell of coffee rising from the kitchen on Saturday mornings. We were together for 5 wonderful years. And these years were so real that I probably still refuse to believe that they really remained in the past. We met in college, on one of those not very bright, but surprisingly warm autumn days, when there is already a slight coolness in the air, and the trees still hold on to the gold of their leaves, and it seems that the whole world has slowed down a little, allowing you to notice the smallest details. He was studying to be an engineer, and I was studying to be an accountant. And our first conversation took place at a general lecture on economics, which he got into by mistake, having mixed up the audiences. I remember how he, embarrassedly scratching the back of his head, sat down next to me and whispered, "It seems I got into the wrong place," and I, smiling, answered, "So, fate brought you," and we both laughed, not even guessing how true my words would turn out to be. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. We got married almost immediately after graduation, without delay, because we saw no point in waiting. We wanted to build our lives now, while our feelings were hot, our plans ambitious, and our hearts filled with confidence. Nestor found a job in a construction company, where he almost immediately became the soul of the team, because he was a man of rare sincerity, always with an open face and that warm look in which there was no falsehood. I got a job at a small accounting firm in the city center, the same one we passed by in our third year and dreamed of one day working in normal offices, with coffee machines and electronic passes. We bought a tiny house on the outskirts, the same one with the white wooden fence, neatly painted, which for some reason everyone considered a cliché, but it seemed to us that this fence held not just boards and paint, but hope, warmth, comfort, and even quiet Sunday evenings. Every Saturday and Sunday, Nestor went out into the yard, he tweaked something, painted something, planted, replanted, carried soil in buckets, and was always smeared in paint or dirt from head to toe, but he never complained, because he simply loved it. Sometimes I would go out to him with a cup of tea, sit on the steps of the porch and watch him, focused but still smiling, making something, and then I would think, if this is happiness, then perhaps it looks exactly like this: simple, quiet, confident. Lately we had been talking more and more about children, and although I was in no hurry, listening to him excitedly talk about the future, about little shoes by the door, about tiny hats, about how they would play football in the yard, I too began to feel excited, as if before an important, real step. He had already chosen names. He laughed that if it was a boy, he would definitely name him after his grandfather, and if it was a girl, then certainly after my grandmother. "Anna, we're going to have the sweetest kids, you'll see, they'll take your brains and hopefully my height," he'd say, hugging me, and I'd just nod, because at that moment I trusted him as I trusted myself. And then there was that visit to Carlos, his college friend who lived 2 hours away and who'd just had a baby. Nestor was so happy to see the baby, he held little Tommy in his arms for so long, asking Carlos about every little detail, what it was like to be woken up in the middle of the night, the first time you heard a baby laugh, the first time someone called you daddy. He was writing it all down in his head, as if he were preparing for the most important project of his life. The drive back was uneventful. We were discussing how soon we should come back, and he joked that he would teach our kids to throw a ball better than Carlos because he would be with them every day, and not just on Sundays. But then the turn, sharp, wet from the rain, and I remember him, as always, slowing down early, signaling, focused. He was always like that as a driver, unhurried, thoughtful, as if he was holding a porcelain cup instead of a car. And then a car came around the corner, flying into our lane, too fast, too suddenly, a sharp turn of the wheel, a scream, a thud, metal on metal, and that was it, nothing more. I remember the world spinning, as if we were part of a kaleidoscope that someone had shaken sharply, and then there was another blow, dull, heavy, like the last chord. Later they would tell me it was a telephone pole, and then darkness, absolute, impenetrable. I woke up in a hospital room where everything smelled sterile, and the silence was broken only by an four. My body ached as if it had been pierced through and through, and I could barely move my arm, which was in a cast, when I opened my eyes. The nurse, noticing this, approached me with such caution, as if she was afraid to scare me back to reality. I asked, "Where is Nestor?" The first thing that came to mind burst out on its own. She did not answer, she only looked at me and went out to get the doctor. A few minutes later, a doctor entered the room, an elderly man with gray temples and eyes in which I immediately saw something I did not want to be afraid of. "Mrs. Bernardi," he began, "I am very sorry," and at that moment I understood everything without words. Nestor did not survive, he died instantly, on impact, and he was already gone when they were just pulling me out of the car. And I screamed, again, loudly, desperately, with such pain that, as it seemed to me, no soul could bear. Then they gave me a sedative. When I woke up again, Dr. Sartori, the same reserved but attentive doctor whose manner of speaking was like the rustling of paper in the silence, explained to me what injuries I had received in the accident: a broken left arm, 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, and many cuts and bruises all over my body, as if the glass of the crashed car itself had decided to leave an autograph of pain on me. He stood at the foot of my hospital bed and spoke with extreme gentleness, as if every word he said could bring down even greater weight on me, and at some point he said a phrase that sounded so alien and offensive that I involuntarily held my breath. "You are very lucky, Anna, everything could have been much worse." Lucky, me? Lucky when the person with whom I was building a future now lies under a white sheet of silence? Lucky when I am left alone, and none of the plans we made make sense anymore? The next day, 2 men in uniform came into the ward, policemen, young, polite, with folders in their hands and apologetic faces, as if they had come not to report facts, but to apologize for a reality that no one could change. One of them, the blonde one, spoke first and told me that the other driver, a man in his 40s, had been drunk, completely out of his mind at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and when he was pulled over after the collision, he didn't even remember what had happened. After he hit us, he drove for almost another mile before he skidded off the road and hit a tree, leaving a trail of destruction from which he emerged with scratches. While my husband died instantly, I didn't answer them, I just stared at one point, unblinking, as if peering into a hole through which my entire previous existence had fallen into nothingness. The whole day passed in a fog. Time ceased to exist, everything merged into one viscous, murky moment from which it was impossible to escape. Nurses came to check my temperature, blood pressure, asked how I was feeling, and I just nodded or shook my head, mechanically, not joining in any dialogue. At some point, a woman appeared, the same psychologist who had apparently been called in to help me cope with grief, and she sat down next to me, began to talk about the phases of loss, about breathing techniques, about resolving feelings, but her voice was distant, as if coming from underwater. And none of her words reached the place in me where my heart was now beating. I heard only one thing: Nestor is dead, and everything else became background, unnecessary noise, like the hum of a switched-off TV in an empty room. The next day, I decided to do what I had been afraid of since the moment I woke up. I took the phone, dialed my parents' number, realizing that I had to tell them what had happened, and deep down hoping for warmth, support, that their reaction could at least slightly reduce the abyss into which I had fallen. Mom answered quickly, her voice was detached, busy, as if she was doing something important at the same time. "Hi, Mom, this is Anna," I said, and she said, "Oh, hi, honey, how are you?" "I'm a little busy right now." I took a deep breath to keep from losing my temper and said bluntly, "Mom, Nestor and I were in an accident. He didn't survive. Nestor is dead." There was silence for a few seconds, not silence, but an emptiness that held no pain, no sympathy, no horror, and then she said, "Oh, Anna, that's terrible, we're so sorry." That was it, "We're just so sorry." It was like I'd told her our cat had died, or that we'd cancelled a trip. No "we'll be there," no "hang in there," not even a "how are you?" "Mom, I'm in the hospital, I can't do this alone, I need your help. Help me organize Nestor's funeral," I continued, trying my best not to cry, but all she answered was, "Well, Anna, this is really tough. Emma just got promoted, and we're throwing a party for her this weekend. We've been planning it for weeks." I couldn't believe my ears. "Mom, my husband is dead," I said, my voice tight. "I understand, Anna," she said, "but Emma worked so hard for this promotion. Doesn't Nestor have parents? And a sister, Linda? They should be the ones doing this anyway." and then, she just hung up. I stared at the phone for what seemed like an eternity, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I was telling my mother that my husband was dead, and she was making sure that she didn't ruin the celebration of my sister's career. My hands were shaking, and I felt my heart squeeze from the betrayal that, as it turned out, could be even worse than the loss itself. But about an hour later, Dawn and Marie, Nestor's parents, entered the room with Linda, his younger sister. When I saw them, for the first time in all this time, I felt like I could breathe. They didn't say unnecessary words, didn't ask unnecessary questions. Dawn, despite my cast and bandages, gently hugged me and said quietly but firmly, "Anna, we'll get through this together." Marie, crying, sat down next to me, took my hand and said in a trembling voice, "He loved you so much. He always talked about you as a miracle." And Linda, without saying a word, put her bag on the nightstand, took out clothes and toiletries, and, like the little sister I never had, helped me carefully wash my hair in the sink, trying not to touch the bandages and bruises. "Don't worry about anything," she said, "we'll take care of everything, Anna, just get better." And I didn't tell them what had happened in the conversation with my parents. I was too ashamed. Nestor's parents, despite their own inconsolable grief, despite the unbearable silence that settled between the words, despite the trembling in their hands, coming from somewhere deep in the pain, without a single reproach took upon themselves everything that at that moment I was unable to even think about, from drawing up a death certificate to choosing a funeral home and discussing the details of the ceremony, while my own parents did not even bother to call again to ask how I was holding up, what was wrong with me, whether I needed any help, as if what had happened did not concern their daughter, but someone far away, whose misfortune was alien to them and out of place in their calendar. After Nestor's family left the hospital room, leaving me surrounded by flowers, a warm blanket and words of support, I was left alone, lying motionless on the bed, feeling the emptiness slowly but inexorably creeping into me again. And I thought about my family, the one I was born into, the one I grew up in, the one I tried to justify for so long. Even when there was nothing left to justify, I remembered over and over again the conversation with my mother, her calm voice, her tired "we are very sorry," her mention of the party in honor of Emma's promotion, and such a wave of disappointment rose inside that it seemed capable of destroying even what remained whole after the accident. Emma had always gotten more attention, more concern, more protection, and although I was used to living with it, now, at the moment of a real life catastrophe, this difference in attitude became simply unbearable. It was not just an injustice, it was a betrayal accumulated over the years. Because it wasn't about envy or resentment, I really had accepted everything as it was for many years, convincing myself that Emma and I simply had different characters, different needs, different degrees of dependence on our parents. But now, in this empty ward, with a cast on my arm and pain in every breath, I couldn't help but see they always chose her. I remembered Emma getting into trouble at school time after time as a child, for being rude to teachers, for skipping classes, for not turning in assignments on time, and every time the school called home, my mother would make excuses. "Emma's just bored because the assignments are too easy," she'd say, adding that the teachers didn't understand her creativity. I was getting certificates for excellent attendance and hard work, and when I brought them home, my dad would nod, say good job, and tape them to the refrigerator door, where they'd sit for a week before getting lost under grocery lists and flyers from local pizza places. In high school, when I was taking advanced placement courses to prepare for college, Emma was struggling to stay afloat, but her parents hired a private consultant to help her get into a good college. "Anna is smart, she can handle it herself," they said, and I did. I got into a more prestigious university on a full scholarship, while Emma went to an expensive private college, where our parents paid for her education in full. And yet, it was Emma, in the eyes of the family, who remained the main pride, a girl with character, the one who is not afraid to find herself. When she dropped out of college in her third year, declaring that she wanted to find her true calling, her parents not only did not condemn her, they supported her and allowed her to live at home for 2 more years, rent-free, with complete freedom to engage in self-development. And when I graduated with honors from university and got my first serious job, my mother asked when I was moving out, because they wanted to remake my room into a creative space for Emma. Even on my wedding day, everything turned out to be permeated with her whims. She was late to the ceremony because, in her words, the stylist ruined her hair, and at the reception she got drunk and gave a long, convoluted toast in which she said how proud she was of me because I had finally found someone who could tolerate me. Nestor was almost seething with anger, but I begged him not to pay attention. This is always the case in our family, I said, and he sighed and nodded, although I could see how hurt he was. And then it all continued according to the same scenario. When Emma was fired from 3 jobs in a row, her mother said that the management did not appreciate her innovative ideas. When she crashed her father's car while texting at the wheel, the other driver was to blame because she should have been more careful. When she maxed out 2 credit cards on clothes, spa treatments, and yoga, her parents told her she deserved a little pampering after working so hard on herself. And now, when I was at my worst, when the world was slipping out from under me, when I didn't know how to get out of bed, let alone organize a funeral for the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, they were too busy celebrating her latest success. Emma had gotten a promotion, and that was more important to them than my husband's death. The next few days spent in the hospital room seemed to disappear into a viscous, imperceptible shroud of time, because every morning began and ended in the same silence, broken only by the soft footsteps of the nurses and the occasional sounds of the 4. But it was on those days that Nestor's family became the anchor that kept my mind from completely sinking into helplessness and grief. Dawn, Marie, and Linda came every day, not because they had to, not out of politeness or obligation, but because they cared, because they couldn't help it, because they loved not only Nestor but me, and there was no doubt in their eyes that I was now their family. They brought me homemade food in plastic containers, smelling of cinnamon and cheese and something that immediately reminded me of home, put fresh magazines on my nightstand, talked me through the details of the funeral arrangements, and did it as if they were afraid to leave me alone even for a moment. Dawn and Marie handled everything, from calling the funeral home and ordering from the flower shops, to meeting with the rector of the church, coordinating with the banquet hall, choosing the music and the program. They took on the excruciatingly difficult part that I could not even imagine, let alone act on. Linda, reserved but incredibly sensitive, became an indispensable support for me. She helped me wash, comb my hair, brought clothes, and one day, entering the room with a neat package, said, "I thought you might want to choose what to wear to the funeral. We can do it together." I couldn't go shopping. My legs were still shaking and my body wouldn't obey, but Linda laid out several options in front of me and even brought cosmetics, offering to carefully style my hair. "Nestor would want you to look beautiful," she said then, gently touching my shoulder. He always bragged about what a beautiful wife he had. And then, 3 days before the funeral, despite the voice inside me telling me it was futile, I decided to give my family another chance. I wrote my mother a message, clear and short, with the date, time, and location. Nestor's funeral is Thursday at 2 p.m. St. Mary's Church, Oak Stan. I really hope you can be there. I need my family. I didn't expect a response, but I checked my phone every few minutes as if something important depended on it. The response came 2 hours later. "Anna, we're leaving tomorrow for Emma's bonus trip. She booked us all a week in Mexico with her promotion bonus. We can't cancel now. Emma's worked so hard for this, and she deserves a celebration. I'm sorry, we'll miss you." The words hit me like a bullet. A bonus trip to Mexico while I was burying my husband. My hands shook, my heart sank, and without thinking, I dialed Emma's number. She answered right away, her voice clear, joyful, filled with anticipation. "Anna, Mom told me about Nestor. It's so sad. But listen, I'm taking everyone to Cancun. My company gave me a huge bonus, and I wanted to do something special for the family." I tried to speak calmly, but my voice still shook. "Emma, Nestor's funeral is on Thursday. Could you postpone the trip for at least a couple of days?" Her tone immediately became sharp, cold, almost accusing. "Anna, I don't change my plans. People die all the time, that's life, but I don't get promoted often, and I want to celebrate with Mom and Dad. They're so proud of me." I felt my fingers tighten on the phone. "Emma, we're talking about my husband, your son-in-law." The answer was a slap in the face. "Look, I barely knew Nestor anyway. Postponing the trip won't bring him back. Stop being so dramatic," and I hung up. I didn't just end the conversation, I threw the phone across the hospital room in a rage, and it hit the wall with a thud, denting the paint and cracking the glass. But the crack inside me was deeper and wider. In that moment, it hit me, my family had never cared about me. I wasn't a daughter, not a sister. I was a convenient reference point, existing only so they could view themselves through the lens of my success and feel okay. My good grades, my stable job, my marriage, my reliability. All of it was just a backdrop to make their failures and turmoil and successes seem more deserved, more human. I was the one who could handle it, the one whose room could be cleared for a hobby, the one whose grief wasn't important enough to put off a beach cocktail. Nestor's funeral took place on a rainy, chilly Thursday morning. The hospital had given me a wheelchair because I still couldn't walk with confidence, and Linda, without asking, wrapped me in a wool scarf and wheeled me through the gloomy streets to St. Mary's Church, where the people whose lives Nestor had touched were already gathering. His colleagues were there, reserved, in dark suits, with tears in their eyes, neighbors, friends, distant relatives. The church was full, everyone loved Nestor. He was the kind of person who never forgot birthdays, who brought soup when you were sick, who helped you put your furniture together without you asking. I kept glancing toward the entrance, hoping that my parents would come to their senses, that they would show up, come in, and sit quietly in the back, but they never did. After the funeral service, when thin streams of rain were no longer just drizzling but seemed to be washing the remnants of hope out of the air, Linda, carefully, as if not wanting to disturb me with an unnecessary movement, rolled the wheelchair closer to the edge of the grave, where Dawn and Marie stood under the canopy, silently, with faces white with restrained emotions, ready to lend a shoulder if I suddenly staggered. The three of us stood shoulder to shoulder and watched as Nestor's coffin, covered in blue velvet and adorned with a wreath of white lilies, was lowered slowly, with an almost solemn sadness, into the earth, and every sound, the creak of the ropes, the dull rustle of the lid being lowered, the heavy breathing of those around us, was etched into my consciousness like an ever-imprinted reality that would now become a part of me. Then, in the very middle of that silent, sacred silence, Linda, leaning closer, whispered cautiously but without hesitation, "Anna, where is your family?" We thought they would be here. I had to tell the truth, the one I still couldn't fully comprehend. They went on vacation, to Mexico. Emma had been promoted, and they didn't want to miss her holiday. Dawn and Marie exchanged glances, a mixture of bewilderment and hidden anger in their eyes, and Linda just shook her head, an almost maternal tenderness in her voice as she said quietly, "Anna, dear, your family has always been a little strange, but this is just wrong." After the funeral, I spent another week in the hospital. The doctors insisted that it was necessary to monitor the dynamics of recovery from the concussion, to observe whether dizziness would begin, how the body reacts to movement, and whether my legs would be able to support me without the risk of falling. These days merged into a monotonous, almost sterile rhythm of procedures and IVs, and only daily visits from Nestor's family prevented me from completely dissolving into indifference. They came not because it was necessary, but because they felt how hard it was for me. Dawn brought me books, simple, kind novels, to distract my thoughts. Marie cooked me light home-cooked dinners and brought me lavender tea in a thermos. Linda, without parting with her light but persistent care, helped me do the exercises from the physiotherapy course, even when I tiredly asked to leave it for tomorrow, and sometimes they just sat there, silent, calm, not asking for words or tears, and with that silence they said more than 100 sentences could have said. When I was finally discharged, Dawn and Marie took me home, and with trembling knees, my fingers clutching the handrails, I crossed the threshold of that very house that Nestor and I had moved into 5 years ago with boxes in our hands, shining eyes, and an endless number of plans, and to walk in there without him, to see everything the same as it had been before Carlos's trip, was the hardest thing I had ever experienced. In the kitchen sink, his coffee mug with a chipped edge, his favorite, with the inscription "The best builder in the world," was still standing. By the door, his work boots, in which he dug in the garden every weekend, were still there, and on the refrigerator door, his notes, written in a hurried but neat hand: milk, bread, eggs, food for Mia. It wasn't just a reminder, it was a presence that was now empty. Linda spent most of the day with me, helping me carefully sort through Nestor's clothes and personal belongings. Each closet, each drawer was like a capsule of his life, filled with smells, touches, and memories. We decided to donate most of it: jackets, work shirts, old jeans, winter boots, but I kept his favorite flannel shirt, green, soft from washing, smelling of lavender laundry detergent and something impossible to describe, just Nestor, and, of course, his wedding ring, which I now kept in a small wooden box on the nightstand. Dawn helped me with the paperwork, the bureaucratic maze that no one is prepared for when they lose a loved one, transferring accounts, filing insurance claims, closing joint accounts, filing tax returns, even changing the electric contract. Each action felt sacrilegious, as if I was finally confirming that he was gone. But the most stunning moment came when I met with Nestor's lawyer, Mr. Davidson, an older, elegant man with a serious but friendly expression who had handled our family's legal affairs since we bought the house. I came to the meeting expecting to hear about some small insurance policy and maybe half of a savings account that belonged to Nestor. We had never discussed money much, not because it was a secret, but simply because we always had enough. He sat me down at the table, opened a file, and began, "Mrs. Bernardi, your husband was a man of great foresight. He didn't just write a will, he carefully planned out his entire estate to ensure that you would have no hardships. He listed it all, the house, the bills, the retirement savings, all going to me." I nodded. It all made sense, but then he continued, "In addition, your husband had a large life insurance policy through his employer. He has increased the coverage several times over the years. The current amount is $1 million. You are named as the sole beneficiary, million." The words seemed to hang in the air, out of place in the reality around us. Stunned, I whispered, "Are you serious? $1 million?" Mr. Davidson nodded calmly. "Yes, ma'am, your husband was very concerned that you would feel safe if anything happened to him. He also had an additional policy for $50,000 to cover any funeral expenses." And then, for the first time in a long time, I cried not from pain, but from love, because even now, when he could no longer hold my hand, Nestor still found a way to take care of me. I left the lawyer's office still in a daze, one that didn't leave me after I closed the door behind me, or even when I got into the car and sat there for a long moment, just staring at the steering wheel, as if it could answer all the questions swirling around in my head. I knew Nestor had insurance, we'd mentioned it briefly over dinner once, and he'd waved it off, saying something like, "Just in case, better safe than sorry." But I'd never suspected the amount would be so significant, $1 million. It sounded unreal, almost absurd, especially when you're still struggling to fully accept that the man is gone. I would give everything, every penny, every digit in the bank account, every cent in his retirement funds, to see him smile again, to hear him laugh at his own pun, to feel him take my hand in the supermarket when I get lost between the aisles. Money doesn't matter when the world is falling apart. Money doesn't comfort me at night when the silence is deafening. Money doesn't replace the breath of a loved one on the pillow next to me. I took 2 more weeks off, not just to rest, but to try to build some semblance of stability. I knew I couldn't hide from reality forever, but I needed time to find the strength to come back. When I finally announced my intention to return to work to my boss, he treated me with sensitivity rare for a corporate environment. He allowed me to work part-time, gradually get into the rhythm, and, strangely enough, work really did become that salvation that allowed me to switch my thoughts from emptiness to numbers, reports, balances for a few hours a day. In the office, they did not pity me, did not look with sympathy. Colleagues simply silently shook my hand and took me back, and in this calm I found comfort. Everything seemed almost normal, almost. A month passed quietly. I lived day by day, not looking too far ahead, not making plans, simply noting that the morning had come, and I was able to get out of bed. And this was already an achievement. Nestor's family continued to be there, not intrusively, but consistently. Marie brought me a pie on Sundays, Dawn helped with the mail and bills, Linda called just to tell how her day went. I started seeing a therapist, and for the first time I allowed myself to speak out loud about the feelings I had been hiding behind a smile for too long. I felt like I was starting to learn to live without Nestor. And then, one unremarkable Saturday, everything changed. I was sitting in the living room with a book, wrapped in a blanket, when I heard the sound of cars pulling up. My heart instantly ached, as if a premonition had overtaken my mind. I went to the window and saw my parents' sedan and Emma's black SUV, which still had the glossy dealership logo on it. My stomach twisted into knots. The doorbell rang too sharply. I opened the door, and my mother, with a forced smile, rushed toward me, exclaiming, "Anna, darling," and carefully hugged me, as if I were made of crystal. "How are you? We were so worried about you." My father stood a little distance away, looking around the house as if he had entered someone else's space, trying to determine if the furniture would fit comfortably. "Emma, beaming, wearing a designer coat and carrying a bag from a brand she hadn't been able to afford until recently, immediately began to examine the interior, not particularly hiding her interest. She walked over to one of the shelves, picked up Nestor's award for architectural design, and twirled it in her hands as she said, "Wow, what a beautiful house, you're so lucky to have so much space." I stood in the middle of the room, not moving forward, and asked point blank, "What do you want?" I wasn't trying to be polite. My mother sat down on the couch, smoothing her skirt and patting the pillow next to her. "Anna, can't we just visit our daughter? We've been worried, we want to know how you're coping with your loss." I stared at her. "You mean my husband died? The funeral you ignored to go to Mexico?" The room fell silent, even the noise of the street seemed to fade. Then Emma spoke, her voice was surprisingly soft, almost pitiful. "Anna, we were in shock, we didn't know how to react, that's why we left, we needed time to think it over." A lie, shameless, deliberate, and we all knew it. I asked again, a little quieter, but more firmly, "What do you really want?" My parents exchanged glances, and by that moment I already knew the answer. My mother cleared her throat, as if preparing her voice for an important announcement. "Well, Anna," she began, we heard from the Johnsons that you'd received the insurance payment for Nestor's death." The Johnsons, our old neighbors, the ones who still called to ask how I was holding up. I didn't hide the amount, but I didn't go into detail about it either. Just mentioned it in passing when Mrs. Johnson said she was glad I wouldn't have to worry about finances. "We thought," my mother continued, "that maybe you could help Emma. She's looking for an apartment, she needs a down payment, maybe half that, to buy something really nice, $500,000. They came to my house, where the smell of his cologne still lingered in the bedroom, where the emptiness of his absence still rang, to ask me for half of the insurance money from my husband's death so that Emma could buy herself a new apartment." Finally, my father, who had been sitting silently until then, as if deciding whether he should intervene at all, spoke up, and his voice was even, almost pedagogical, as if he were explaining to me why I was the one who was wrong about basic things that he thought should be obvious to me. "Anna," he began, "you have to understand, Emma worked very hard to get her promotion, she deserves a nice place to live, and we understand that you have more than enough money, it's enough for both of us. With some left over." He said it with the same expression as if he were offering to lend me a cup of sugar instead of half the money my husband had left me after his tragic death. I looked at the three of them, my mother, father, and sister, sitting in my living room, the same living room where Nestor and I had once sat on the couch on Sundays, hugging, discussing how we would remodel the kitchen, choosing names for future children, laughing at old photographs, dreaming of old age spent together, and I realized that I didn't know them, or rather, I realized that I had never known them, or didn't want to admit what they were really like. "Get out," I said quietly but firmly, tearing off the mask of politeness that still remained on my face. My mother threw up her hands, frowned, and spoke with a hint of accusation that she heard in her voice every time I refused to do as she wanted. "Anna, don't be selfish, Emma is your sister." I looked up and my voice became louder, sharper, almost a scream. "Get out of my house." All three of them flinched. Emma grabbed her purse from the chair and, shaking her head, with a haughty expression on her face, said, "You are behaving completely unreasonably, we are a family, and family helps each other." I just looked at her and in that moment my heart filled not with sadness, not with despair, but with rage, the same rage that had been building up for years when I had to restrain myself, to be convenient, accommodating. Where was my family when I needed help organizing Nestor's funeral? Where were you when I was lying in the hospital, barely able to get out of bed? Where were you when I needed at least one kind word? And now you are here because you think you can take the money my husband left me, money I did not ask for, money I would give without thinking, just to have him back. After these words, they left, no one apologized, no one turned around, and only emptiness remained in the air after the slammed door. I sank down on the couch and cried. At first, I just let the tears flow. And then the sobs burst out, deep, angry, powerless. I cried not because I was sad, sadness was already a part of my daily life, like a shadow following me. I cried from anger, from that burning, destructive rage that I had been holding in for too long. I thought that it would all end there, that maybe they would be ashamed, that they would back off. How wrong I was. The next day, just as the sun was rising above the horizon, The phone rang. My mother called 6 times in a row. I didn't answer, but on the seventh, exhausted and tired of the annoying sound, I picked up. Anna, she began with deliberate gentleness, we need to talk about this rationally. Emma really needs that money, and you're just being stubborn. This is unreasonable, you could show some compassion. I hung up. A few minutes later, Emma called, Anna, I can't believe you're acting like this. I'm your sister, I've never asked you for anything, ever. A lie, a blatant, shameless lie. Emma had asked for money countless times, for rent, for food, for emergencies, for a trip to take a break from the stress. I gave, always, and she never gave anything back. I hung up again, then my father called. I didn't pick up, but he left a long voicemail. His voice was cold, sharp as ice. He said he was disappointed, that my behavior was unworthy, that Carlos, Nestor's friend, was right to call me difficult. He said Nestor would be ashamed to see me turn my back on my family. That last jab, the mention of Nestor, the attempt to place him between me and my right to boundaries, hurt so deeply that I didn't hesitate. I went into my settings and blocked their numbers, all three, but they didn't stop. First, the messages started coming from strange numbers, from Aunt Linda, not Linda, Nestor's sister, but Aunt Linda, my father's biological sister, with whom I barely spoke. She wrote, Anna, I don't want to interfere, but maybe you should reconsider your position. All of this can be resolved with love. Think about what's really important. I didn't answer anything else. Then my mom took the next step. She wrote on Facebook. An open, public post, a long, dramatic post, full of false emotions and hidden truths. She wrote about how her daughter, me, had received a large sum of money and now, despite her family's desperate need, she refused to help. She didn't mention Nestor's death, not a word about the funeral they ignored, not a word about the silence they plunged me into. She made it seem like I had hit the jackpot and then immediately turned my back on the ones who raised her. The post ended with the phrase, it's so hard when your own child turns her back on her family. We raised Anna better, but grief can make people do terrible things. Please pray for our family during this difficult time. The comments started pouring in almost immediately, as if someone had read my mother's post and given me an unspoken signal, and suddenly the tiny social circle that revolved around my parents, their friends from church, distant relatives, aunts, cousins, acquaintances from clubs and scout camps and food drives, all felt compelled to weigh in. They wrote that it hurt to see me turn my back on my family, that helping my sister wasn't a duty but an act of love, that my parents deserved respect, especially after all they'd done for me. Some said that grief could cloud judgment but that they hoped I would come to my senses. What infuriated me most were the sympathetic comments, not for me, but for my mother. It must be especially hard for such a wonderful woman, they wrote, to have her own daughter turn so cold. I sat in front of the screen, reading all this, and felt such rage rising inside me that it was impossible to calm down, not because they didn't understand me, but because they were again trying to mold me into the version that was convenient for them. Patient, calm, grateful, I was silent for 2 days, letting all these lies accumulate, and finally realized that silence is also a choice, and I will not make it again. I wrote my post, long, honest, without unnecessary drama, just the facts, laid out calmly, with a chronology of events. I told how my parents did not answer my first call after the accident, how they refused to help with Nestor's funeral, went to Mexico to celebrate Emma's promotion, how they contacted me for the first time in all this time only after they found out about the insurance payment. I told how they asked me for half the money, not for emergency help, not for saving a life, but for an apartment for Emma. And I didn't just tell him, I attached screenshots, conversations, messages where my mother wrote, we can't cancel the trip now, and Emma wrote, people die every day, that's no reason to cancel small joys. I attached audio messages in which my father called me selfish and said that Nestor would be ashamed of me. I wasn't taking revenge, I was simply defending myself. The reaction was immediate. The people who had recently been throwing accusations at me were now in shock. The comments came one after another, but now they sounded different. I can't believe they skipped your husband's funeral for a vacation. Ask a widow for $500,000? That's disgusting. Anna, you don't owe them anything. They've shown their true colors. They don't deserve your forgiveness. My mother's original post had disappeared, deleted, probably in a hurry, but the screenshots had already spread. People were reposting my story, sharing it, discussing it. Within a week, almost the entire city knew the truth, and 2 weeks later, I received a letter. Not a call, not a message in a messenger, not even a paper letter, but an official email, as if she were addressing a legal authority rather than her daughter. The subject line was dry, about our relationship. The text contained polished, verified phrases, as if they had been composed with someone's help. Anna, your public outburst has shamed our family beyond repair. Your father and I are outraged by your greed and your willingness to put family matters on public display. Effective immediately, we are ending any relationship with you. You are no longer welcome in our home, and we will have no further contact with you. We hope you are happy with your choice to put money before family. Don't expect us at your deathbed. Signed, Mom. The irony was almost mocking. They were accusing me of putting money before family, when money was the only reason they had come to me in the first place after my husband's death. They, who had ignored the funeral, forgotten to call, ignored my cry for help, were now accusing me of betrayal. But, when I finished reading that letter, I felt no pain, no anger. I felt relief. For the first time in my life, I felt a weight lift. I didn't owe them anything anymore. I no longer had to conform, to please, to apologize for not being Emma, to justify my achievements, to minimize my pain so as not to seem capricious. I was free. And all the while, Nestor's family continued to be there. When I told them about all this drama, about the posts, the messages, the letters, Marie only shook her head and hugged me, pressing me gently to her, as only those who truly love do. Darling, she said, you will be better off without people like that in your life. It was then, when the veil of pain began to dissipate, and something like quiet confidence appeared in my heart instead of emptiness, that I made a decision that was prompted not so much by reason as by that deep part of me where true love lives, not for myself, not for memory, but for those who showed care when the rest of the world turned away. On Thanksgiving, that first one after the loss, when the house seemed destined to echo with loneliness, I did something that I still remember with warmth and peace. I invited Nestor's family, Marie, Dawn, and Linda, to my house for dinner. I wanted the day to be not a reminder of who we had lost, but a testament to the love that lived on in those who remained. I spent the day in the kitchen, preparing what had once been Nestor's favorite menu, turkey with stuffing, his mother's recipe, with spices and herbs that she dried on the windowsill herself and added with special care so that the taste would remind him of home. Green bean casserole with a crispy crust that Nestor always asked for more of, and mashed potatoes with butter and garlic, just the way he liked them. I set the table, without excesses, but with the trepidation with which people prepare not just food, but a small miracle, to recreate an atmosphere of warmth and presence. We ate for a long time, talked, laughed, remembered funny stories, and at some point I realized that the evening was not sad, but truly family-like. And then, when the dishes were already stacked in the sink, and the tea was cooling in the cups, I realized that I had to say what I had been carrying inside for a long time. I looked at them, the three of them, tired but calm, with kind eyes and quiet smiles, and said, I've been thinking about the life insurance payment on Nestor for a long time, and I know he would want his family to be safe, both physically and mentally. I want to give you half of it, $500,000. The room went silent, the air seemed to thicken, as if before a thunderstorm. Marie covered her mouth with her hand and tears rolled down her cheeks, as sincere as anything she had ever said. Anna, we can't accept this, she whispered, shaking her head. Dawn frowned, looking me straight in the eye, and said, Anna, this money is yours. Nestor wanted it yours. He would have approved completely. I smiled through my tears and said, he loved you. He always spoke of you with tenderness. He wanted you not to worry, to feel protected. Please accept this as part of his love. It took time, persuasion, even tears, but in the end they agreed, not because they wanted money, but because they understood that for me it was a way to express gratitude, appreciation, love. The following week, we completed all the paperwork with a lawyer, and the money was officially transferred to Dawn and Marie's account. 6 months have passed since then. Life has not returned to its usual course. It has been built anew, step by step, on a new trajectory, with new meanings. I still miss Nestor every day. Sometimes, when I hear a song he loved, I stop and close my eyes, as if hoping to see him next to me again. But I have learned to be alone without feeling lonely. I continue to work in an accounting firm, not because I need money, but because I like to feel needed, to structure my day, to distract myself from sadness. I live in our house. It has become quiet, but not empty. I talk to Nestor in my head every night. And I think he listens. I am not ready for a new relationship, and perhaps I will not be for a long time, maybe even never, but I do not need it to feel complete. I am provided for, and this gives me freedom. But what is much more important, I have people who love me sincerely, unconditionally. Since I received that last letter from my parents, they have not contacted me anymore. Not a call, not a card, not a chance meeting. Sometimes I catch myself wondering whether Emma bought the apartment she dreamed of, but, to tell the truth, I don't care anymore. My family is not those with whom I am connected by blood, but those who stayed by my side when I lost everything. Nestor's family has become a real family for me. We have dinner together every Sunday, share news, laugh, argue, bake pies, decorate the tree, invite the neighbors as they always did, and as I do with them now. Linda calls me her daughter-in-law not out of politeness, but because she truly considers me a part of her life. Dawn and Marie are not just my in-laws, they have become my parents, the way parents should be, attentive, supportive, respectful of my decisions. I finally understood what it means to be in a family, and it has nothing to do with what is written on the birth certificate. Write a comment what you think about this story, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel and put a like. See you soon.